Welcome, traveler, to a kingdom once overflowing with life, now lying in ruins, its secrets buried beneath a veil of mystery. From the majestic heights of Crystal Peak to the haunting depths of the abyss, every corner whispers tales of tragedy and triumph. Are you ready to uncover the rise and fall of a kingdom forged in courage and sacrifice? Before this land was known as Hallownest, an ancient civilization once flourished in these vast tunnels. The bugs worshipped no lord, god, or king, but devoted themselves to the perpetual darkness known as void. Through this reverence, they gained profound knowledge, mastering the chaotic power of void and uniting it through sheer will. They also discovered soul, a potent, arcane force capable of breathing life into bug and beast, mending wounds, and empowering spellcraft. Soul totems were erected, carved in the forms of now long-forgotten creatures to store this vital energy, marking the civilization's triumphs. Yet, despite their magnificence, this entire civilization vanished. The fate that befell them remains unknown, but the hollowed-out shells of great beasts now stand as eerie monuments, silent witnesses to a time long past. Over time, the tunnels filled once more with insect tribes, each with their own beliefs, customs, and higher beings, while others lived simpler lives, driven by base instincts and survival. It was during this time that a new era was about to unfold, a transformation like none could have ever dreamed. The arrival of a worm, a higher being with godlike powers, who foresaw himself as the ruler of an eternal kingdom, Hallownest. To achieve this vision, he shed his vast form, emerging reborn in the likeness of the bugs already dwelling in these lands. At what is now known as Kingdom's Edge, he became the Pale King. And despite his humble new shell, his radiant visage was said to be blinding to behold. In this new form, the Pale King bestowed sentience and intelligence to the simple bugs, and in return for their devotion, he promised an eternal kingdom. But for his dream to take shape, he needed to unite the tribes that occupied Hallownest's borders. Only together could they forge an enduring legacy. To the west, the Weaver tribe, known for their intelligence and skill in weaving spells, shields, and tales from spider silk. They had traveled from a distant homeland and settled in a den of suspended silken homes. However, the Weavers and the Spider tribe of Deepnest were unified in their loyalty to their king and queen, refusing to acknowledge the Pale King's rule. Deepnest would not bow to Hallownest's expanding influence and remained defiantly independent. In contrast, the Mantis tribe, fierce warriors who ruled the southernmost region of the fungal waste, respected martial prowess above all else. Their greatest fighters, the Mantis lords, led the tribe. Though they served neither god nor king, a truce was forged. The tribe would retain their independence in exchange for continuing their long-standing defense against the encroachment of Deepnest. The mushrooms of the fungal waste believe their strength came from the fungal core, a shared mind that enabled swift communication and coordinated defense. They accepted the Pale King's rule, trusting that his foresight would protect them from the dangers of the future. Meanwhile, the bees of the hive wished to remain independent, governed solely by their queen, Vespa. She saw no place for her people in the Pale King's kingdom, and sealed her hive behind thick walls of beeswax, allowing only patrol bees to safeguard its borders. Once barren caverns were turned into a lush sanctuary by a higher being, the giant slug, Un. Her children, the Mosskin, nurtured this forest, which flourished with vibrant flora and fauna. Despite noticing that On's presence was beginning to fade, they allowed the Pale King to build roads across their land. These pathways became known as Green Path, but the Mosskin warned that any who stray from the king's road would face the laws of Un. The Moth tribe were children of the Radiance, a higher being of light. In exchange for their devotion, she taught them to harness essence, enabling them to enter the dream realm. However, when the Pale King offered them a place in Hallownest, the Moths turned away from their ancient deity, embracing him instead. Stripped of her followers, the Radiance began to fade, her light dimming as her existence slipped into obscurity. The Moths, meanwhile, took on the solemn duty of tending to the dead within the resting grounds. Under the Pale King's influence, Hallownest flourished, entering a golden age marked by growth and abundance. The capital city became a thriving hub of trade and adventure, drawing creatures from distant lands. Travelers entered through King's Pass, passing through the humble town of Dirtmouth before reaching the crossroads that connected the entire kingdom beneath the surface. In the mines of Crystal Peak, shimmering purple gems powered the kingdom's many wonders, a testament to Hallownest's boundless potential. The capital itself rose to stunning heights, its spires reaching toward the cavern ceiling, and statues of noble knights stood as enduring symbols of glory. To the west, common bugs practiced their trades, while the aristocracy thrived in the Eastern District, amassing wealth and enjoying lives of luxury. The Pale King's vision had given rise to a vast civilization, its borders spanning numerous territories. To support this growth, he established a transit system of stags and trams, ensuring that the people and goods could travel throughout Hallownest. However, the king's ambition encountered resistance. A tram line meant to extend into Deepnest was abandoned when the Spider Tribe retaliated, leaving workers slain and the project abandoned. This failure deepened the rift between Hallownest and Deepnest, cementing their distraught relationship. As Hallownest prospered, the Pale King did not rule alone. At his side stood the White Lady, a higher being of root. Their union was sealed with the creation of the king's soul, a powerful charm capable of producing limitless soul. The Queen's gardens were established within the lush region of Green Path and transformed into a secluded retreat. There, greenhouses flourished and statues of royalty rose, guarded by loyal protectors. Few were granted entry into this lush sanctuary, keeping this area protected from prying eyes. The White Palace rose within the ancient basin, a magnificent structure where the Pale King, the White Lady, and their royal retainers resided. The secluded location afforded privacy, and the king often remained within the palace walls, seldom appearing before his subjects. To honor him, citizens constructed shrines, statues, and king's idols as symbols of reverence and gratitude. Below the palace lay the abyss, a dark chasm filled with the amorphous void and remnants of the ancient civilization that had once inhabited the depths. Intrigued by its chaotic power, the king discovered that his own radiant light could subdue the void's volatile nature. To harness this power, he established a lighthouse to keep the void's tendrils contained, entrusting a loyal subject to ensure its constant illumination. With the void tamed, the king acquired samples and brought them to his workshop, where he could experiment and unlock the secrets of its dark potential. In time, the Pale King learned to shape the void, molding it through sheer will into constructs known as king's molds and wing molds. hollow suits of armor infused with void to guard the palace and maintain order. Beyond the palace walls, the 5 great knights stood as Hallownest elite defenders, each bearing ornate seals that symbolized their service and nobility. Though much of their history has faded, fragments remain. Ogrim, whose loyalty was unyielding. Hegemol, the gentle giant, known for his humor and soft-spoken nature. Zamir, a visitor from a serene land who carried delicate flowers. Drya, fierce and compassionate, a warrior of unmatched wisdom. And Isma, remembered above all for her kindness. Their stories, though fragmented, are woven into the legacy of the kingdom. As Hallownest reached its zenith, it became a sanctuary for all bugs and creatures seeking a place to belong. Goods flowed into the capital city, though little left its borders. The bugs of Hallownest, once driven by primal instincts, grew complacent in their comforts, their wild nature replaced with newfound intelligence. Outside Hallownest, desolate wastelands stretched endlessly. Those who strayed too far surrendered their expanded minds, their memories of the king's light fading. Even creatures of sound mind would find their time in Hallownest slipping into a distant haze, a reminder of a life before the king, a life that was savage and brutishly short. Yet, under the reign of the Pale King and White Lady, a barren land of tunnels transformed into a magnificent kingdom. Hallownest became a haven for adventurers, doctors, scholars, singers, and traders alike. The king's light had indeed brought prosperity, drawing travelers from distant lands, but his influence had also extinguished another's. Once devoted followers of the Radiance, the Moth tribe had forgotten their creator under the influence of the Pale King's light. As Hallownest thrived, memories of the Radiance faded, leaving only remnants of the Moth's past devotion. However, the Radiance was not entirely forgotten. At the summit of Crystal Peak, known as Hallownest's Crown, mysterious glyphs emit a radiant glow, while a statue of the Radiance stands vigil overlooking the kingdom below. This solitary shrine kept her memory alive, a flicker of light in the darkened corners of Hallownest. The Radiance, seeking vengeance against those who had turned their backs on her, and against the Pale King who sought to extinguish her light, began her retaliation. Through her power over the dream realm, she invaded the dreams of the bugs of Hallownest, appearing as a burning light, offering protection. Her presence became inescapable as she forced the kingdom's inhabitants to remember her. As her influence spread, countless bugs found themselves dreaming of the forgotten light, haunted by the Radiant's relentless efforts to reclaim their devotion. The Pale King urged his subjects to resist the light that plagued their dreams, but in doing so, they only fueled its manifestation. What began as a subtle intrusion transformed into a rampant infection that swept through Hallownest like wildfire, casting its victims into a deep, unending sleep. Those who succumbed awoke with shattered minds, while the few who struggled against the Radiant's light were consumed by it all the more. The afflicted turned on the uninfected, their eyes glowing with an intense orange hue, their bodies swelling with grotesque cysts. The infection was not merely a physical blight. It connected its victims to the Radiant's will, binding them to her hive mind and allowing her to command their every action. Desperation spread as the infection claimed more lives, and panic took root in the hearts of the citizens. Many turned to their gods for protection, performing rituals and prayers to the Pale King, hoping for salvation. But no prayer could break the Radiance grip. As the infection continued to consume the populace, Hallownest's heart closed its gates, and the stagways and tram stations were shut down, all in a desperate effort to halt the spread of the blight. The wealthy and the privileged took refuge behind the sealed borders, retreating into the inner sanctum of the city, hoping to wait out the nightmare beyond the gates. The infection ravaged Hallownest, and with each passing day, the Radiance light burned brighter, seeking to reclaim the kingdom and snuff out the Pale King's legacy. He desperately sought a way to save his kingdom from the formless adversary that threatened its very existence. Even the 5 great knights, his most trusted protectors, could do nothing to help him or his beleaguered subjects. In desperation, he turned his gaze towards the abyss, to the dark power of the void, the ancient enemy of the Radiance. For where dreams are the realm of thought, memory, and will, the void is their absence, a place where all light is consumed. The Pale King conceived a desperate plan and sought the aid of the White Lady. Together, they created many eggs, casting them down into the abyss where the corruption of the void would seep into their offspring. From this dark union emerged the vessels, empty shells imbued with the power of the void. They began a relentless search for a pure vessel, a being wholly immune to the Radiance. The king and queen sacrificed countless children. No cost was too great. Hallownest must endure, no matter the price. A vessel of pure void was essential to contain the Radiance and imprison her blinding light. For the Radiance, who could infect any mind or will, needed a host devoid of both, an empty shell free from emotion or thought, a prison she could not manipulate. This vessel would sever her connection to the waking world, trapping her forever within a silent mind. Thousands of their spawn proved unworthy, unable to withstand the trials. Their hollow shells rained back into the abyss, shattered and discarded, leaving mountains of broken remains where their wandering shades now linger. But at last, one emerged, chosen, pure, and empty of will, utterly resistant to the Radiance's influence. The Pale King took this vessel from the abyss and sealed the birthplace with the king's brand, abandoning the forsaken children in darkness. Born of God and void, this hollow night would be the salvation of Hallownest and the prison for the Radiance. The young vessel was brought to the White Palace, where the king raised it as his own. They became inseparable. The Hollow Knight learned of the plague, of valor, of duty, and of its sacred role in containing the Radiance for a king who clung desperately to the last hope for his crumbling kingdom. Though it had no voice, the Hollow Knight accepted its fate. Yet, this was only the first part of the Pale King's intricate plan. 3 powerful beings would be required, and their power would be used to seal the Hollow Knight within the temple of the Black Egg. They would become known as the Dreamers, for they too would join the Hollow Knight in eternal slumber. Lorien the Watcher, one of the king's most loyal and devoted subjects, had kept vigil over the capital from the highest spire, his telescope ever watchful for signs of danger. When the Pale King asked him to become a dreamer, Lorien accepted without hesitation, his unwavering loyalty unbroken and guarded by the Watcher Knights, who stood ready to repel any threat who might disturb his slumber. Monoman the Teacher, a brilliant mind and one of Hallownest's most revered scholars, resided in a research archive hidden deep in the midst of Fog Canyon. Her genius had aided in many of the kingdom's greatest discoveries during its golden age. Though she agreed to the king's request, Monoman prepared her own contingency. She entrusted Umu, a sentient jellyfish, with safeguarding her resting place, and she tasked her assistant, Quirrell, with carrying her mask. Imbued with her power, the mask would protect him from the mental and physical erosion as he wandered the lands beyond Hallownest. Although his memories of the kingdom would fade, should the need arise, she could call him to return. Though the spider tribe lay outside the Pale King's domain, the infection threatened them as well. With Deep Nest mourning the loss of its king, Hera the Beast, the third and final dreamer, agreed to the Pale King's request, but she demanded something in return. A child, an heir to the spider tribe, to ensure the continuation of her bloodline. The Pale King consented, and thus Hornet was born, daughter of God and Beast. The Hollow Knight, now fully grown and hailed throughout the kingdom as Hallownest's savior, was brought to the Temple of the Black Egg. The knight was lulled into a deep sleep, offering its dreamscape, as heavy chains bearing seals of binding reinforced its imprisonment. With the Radiance drawn into the dream, the Pale King sprung his trap, binding her within the Hollow Knight. Hera's time with her daughter, Hornet, was cut short, as the dreamers entered the dream realm, fulfilling their promises. Their seals emblazoned on the surface of the Black Egg. With the night sealed inside, the entire kingdom held its breath and waited. Soon, a sigh of relief. The relentless plague that had ravaged so many abated. The minds of the bugs were once again their own, freed from the torment of that terrible light. Many ventured to the Temple of the Black Egg to pray, finding a sense of peace within its walls. In the capital, citizens built memorials in honor of the great sacrifice of the Hollow Knight and the Dreamers, their memory immortalized in stone. The worship of the Pale King was stronger than ever. The bugs revered their ruler as a god who had given up his own child to save the kingdom. With the borders reopened, travel and trade resumed as Hallownest struggled to rebuild and heal from its weakened state. For a time, the plan to imprison the Radiance inside the pure vessel, the Hollow Knight, initially succeeded. But a critical flaw emerged. An idea, or a bond, tarnished the vessel, rendering it impure. Whether it was pride, attachment to the Pale King, or some other spark, this flaw allowed the Radiance to persist, slowly eroding her prison. As her influence spread, subtly at first, Hallownest descended into a second outbreak of the infection, affecting not just living bugs, but reanimating the dead as well. The infection's renewed spread once again brought madness to the dreams of bugs. Those who succumbed to its influence lost their identities, became physically deformed, and their husks corrupted with orange cyst. The Pale King's efforts to contain the infection, such as sealing the tram and stag stations and closing the capital gates, proved inadequate once again. As more succumbed to the Radiance's call, the once great kingdom began to fracture further. Amid this collapse, many areas of Hallownest developed unique responses to the infection. The miners of Crystal Peak became feral, some merging with the crystals they mined. In the fungal wastes, the mushroom tribe turned hostile, spreading toxic spores, and some followed a mysterious master herald said to signal the end of an age. The Mosskin, unable to hear Un's call, abandoned her for the Radiance, while the Hive, already secluded from the kingdom, sealed themselves off completely after Queen Vespa's death. Meanwhile, in the Soul Sanctum, the Soul Master and his scholars pursued a misguided belief that the manipulation of soul could cure the infection, leading to tragic experiments that transformed many into twisted mistakes. The burdens of Hallownest weighed heavily upon the White Lady. Haunted by the role she played in the creation of the vessels and the countless children discarded in the abyss, she could no longer bear to continue in the White Palace, a place filled with reminders of her choices. To distance herself from the cycle of sorrow and the possibility of bearing future offspring, the White Lady departed to the Queen's Gardens. There she enclosed herself in a protective cocoon, using her powers to isolate herself and shield her consciousness from the tragedies of the outside world. As the infection spread, the 5 great knights, the kingdom's finest defenders, found themselves powerless to halt its advance. Even their legendary prowess could not stave off the devastation that consumed Hallownest. Dryia, one of the great knights, took it upon herself to remain by the side of the White Lady, committing to protect the Queen at all cost. Meanwhile, the other knights faced their own fates. Hegemel, a knight of great renown, lost his armor to a maggot who took up the mantle in a bid to protect his kin. Stripped of his protective shell, Hegemel faded from prominence, leaving behind only whispers of his fate. Ogrim, another knight, retreated to the waterways and adopted the identity of the Dung Defender. He remained steadfastly loyal to the kingdom, defending the royal waterways and Yzma's grove, the latter of which had become overgrown, obscuring the lifeless form of Yzma herself as her body rests entwined with plant life, her fate shrouded in mystery. The Mantis tribe, through sheer strength of will, managed to resist the influence of the Radiance, fending off the infection even as internal strife brewed. Tempted by promises of power, one of the 4 leaders, seduced by the Radiance light, betrayed his kin in pursuit of greater strength. Branded the traitor Lord, he and his followers embraced the infection and were consequently exiled, and claimed a section of the Queen's Gardens as their new territory, challenging not only but also the White Lady. This encroachment did not go unanswered. Dryia, fiercely loyal to the White Lady, defended the gardens from the invaders. The conflict was brutal, and though Dryia fought valiantly, she eventually fell to the relentless assaults. The traitors, however, found little solace in their aggression. The infection soon consumed them, reducing them to mindless husk driven by the Radiance's influence, while the White Lady, deep within her cocoon, remained oblivious to the tragedy that unfolded around her. She did not realize that her protector had fallen, nor that the gardens, once a place of beauty and serenity, had become a battlefield where nature and infection clashed. Amidst these dark times, the Traitor Lord's daughter succumbed to death, and her body was laid to rest in the Queen's Gardens. Zamir, her love and grieving partner, was unable to cope with the loss. Despite the Mantis Lords deeming their union unacceptable and ordering their separation, their love had endured. Now consumed with grief and unable to reconcile her sorrow, Zamir renounced her duties as a great knight and wandered the resting grounds, embracing a life of mourning. There she became known as the Grey Mourner, a sorrowful figure whose existence was defined by loss and the unfulfilled promise of love. As the infection of the Radiance continued to spread throughout Hallownest, the kingdom's carefully crafted order began to crumble, with its structure giving way to chaos and despair. The Pale King and the grand White Palace itself vanished from the world without a trace. The mystery surrounding the disappearance of both the king and his palace left many with questions and a deep sense of loss. Relic seeker Lem, a collector and historian of Hallownest's past, observed that there were no signs of struggle, damage, or any evidence of an attack. Nothing to suggest that the palace had fallen due to an external force. It simply disappeared, leaving behind an emptiness that only deepened the sense of despair. The suddenness of the disappearance was as eerie as it was absolute, almost as if the palace had never existed at all. The king's sudden disappearance was not only a physical vanishing, but a symbolic one as well. As Hallownest descended further into ruin, the Pale King's retreat marked the abandonment of the subjects he had once promised to uplift. Without their ruler, many of the bugs struggled to find a way to resist the infection on their own. Some sought out old rituals and desperate measures, while others succumbed to the Radiance's influence, losing themselves to the collective consciousness that slowly spread across the kingdom. As the infection spread, deep within the abyss, the void whispered. It called out to the keeper of the lighthouse, the Pale King's loyal retainer, who had been stationed to maintain the light. But the void's influence was persistent, and eventually managed to sway the keeper to betray his duty and extinguish the light. With the lighthouse turned off, the boundary between the void and the rest of Hallownest weakened, allowing the dark, chaotic force to extend its influence. The vessels, sealed away, retained some spark of life. From the heap of discarded vessels and abandoned children, some stirred and roamed the abyss, discovering a secret tunnel, a way out, despite the king's efforts to seal the entrance. One vessel found their way into Hallownest and left it behind, while the others remained trapped within the darkness. As time passed and the infection ravaged the land, the few moths that remained slowly faded away, unable to withstand the combined forces of time, despair, and the infection. Ultimately, only the seer was left, the last living moth. She remained committed to her duty in the resting grounds, tending to the graves of the dead and the fragments of Hallownest history, while still holding on to the hope that the wielder would one day appear to fulfill the prophecy and grant salvation to the land. Among the travelers was a group known as the God-Seekers from the Land of Storms. Devoted to seeking out and communing with higher beings, they possessed a fervent longing to find gods worthy of worship. However, upon arriving in Hallownest, the God-Seeker herself fell into deep hibernation, encased within a cocoon that resembled a sarcophagus. Yet the cocoon was not merely left to rest. It had been securely chained and locked, as though someone, or something, wished to ensure that the God-Seeker remained bound. In the remote town of Dartmouth, located above the ruins of Hallownest, few inhabitants remained. As the infection spread, many residents either fled or ventured into the well leading to the forgotten crossroads below, hoping to uncover answers or escape the decay. Among the town's few remaining inhabitants were Elderbug, who had seen the town's glory fade over the years, Cornifer, a cartographer, who explored the depths and documented the kingdom's labyrinth passages, and his wife, Izelda, who managed the map shop in town. In the eastern reaches, ash fell like snow, coating the kingdom's edge with the remains of the Pale King's old worm form. Despite the desolate landscape, the Colosseum of Fools thrived as an arena for warriors seeking glory and recognition. The Lord Fool, who had once presided over the arena, eventually passed away unnoticed. Nevertheless, the Colosseum continued to draw challengers from far and wide, with many meeting their end in its trials. their bodies discarded into the chasm below. The god Tamer became a prominent figure in the Colosseum, taking on all who sought to earn the title of champion. The City of Tears, once a center of life and culture, was now a hollow echo of its former self, its streets deserted and its buildings slowly crumbling. Yet, some signs of life remained. Lem, the relic seeker, set up shop in the city, scavenging artifacts from Hallownest's golden age. His interest extended beyond the relics of Hallownest to the mysterious arcane eggs, relics of an older civilization predating the kingdom. Meanwhile, a shrewd banker named Millibel set up a bank in the Fog Canyon to store travelers' geo. In the fungal waste, the charm seller Legator lived a reclusive life, offering his charms in exchange for geo. The plants in Greenpath became overgrown and consumed the architecture and Pilgrim's Way. The Weavers, once prominent in Deep Nest, had long since departed, sensing the resurgence of the infection and leaving Hornet mostly alone in her watch over Hallownest, guarding ancient sites such as the cast-off shell and the Temple of the Black Egg, all while confronting the infected husk that populated the kingdom. Amidst this bleak landscape, a flicker of hope emerged with the arrival of Quirrell, a former disciple of Monoman the teacher, returning to Hallownest after time abroad. Quirrell's memories had become clouded, and he wandered the kingdom in search of answers and closure. His arrival coincided with the return of another figure, the Knight, a vessel who had escaped from the abyss and wandered beyond the kingdom. Whether drawn by the call of the Radiance, the anguished cry of the Hollow Knight, or some other unknown force, the Knight returned to Hallownest to confront its fate. Hallownest had become a place where dreams and memories lingered, its inhabitants living in the shadows of a bygone era. Spirits waited for travelers, reenacting the battles and routines of their former lives. Even in stasis, the kingdom was not entirely lifeless. Some bugs, such as Zote the Mighty, continued to wander, driven by grand delusions of heroism, while others, like Cloth, sought a warrior's death amidst the dangers of the kingdom. Throughout Hallownest, the infection continued to rise, reanimating the bodies of the fallen and turning them into aggressive husks. The seals of the Dreamers still held, but the stasis that had preserved the kingdom was slowly unraveling, heralding a new chapter in Hallownest's long, tragic history. The Knight's arrival marked the beginning of the end for this stasis, a journey towards resolution or the final collapse of the kingdom. As we reflect on the echoes of the past, it's clear that Hallownest is more than just a setting. It's a living tapestry of stories, struggles, and sacrifices. What part of Hallownest's history resonated with you most? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this journey enlightening, please like, subscribe, or become a member and join me on the next expedition into the realms of lore and legend. Until then, keep your lanterns lit, and I will see you next time, traveler.